The taste of recycled air and metal shavings still fills my mouth from that first morning when I opened my eyes to Gothic spires piercing a blood-red sky. My name is Chen, former software engineer from Terra's ancient past, now just another lost soul in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. I survived exactly 93 days in this nightmare universe before my humanity was stripped away piece by piece. You think that makes me weak, but you don't know what I've seen lurking in the shadows between stars. The Imperium doesn't want you to know how quickly civilization can crumble when faced with horrors beyond comprehension. This is my testimony of those final days as a free man. Before the Inquisition found me, before the mutations began, before I learned that in this universe, survival isn't about living, it's about choosing how you die. Chapter 1. Awakening in Hell. The first thing you notice about waking up in the 41st millennium isn't the changed skyline or the massive cathedral spires that dwarf any structure from your time. It's the smell. Incense mixed with industrial lubricants, human sweat, and something else. Something organic and wrong that makes your stomach clench with primal fear. I found myself sprawled on cold rockcrete in what appeared to be a service tunnel beneath Hive Tertius on Mordia Prime. My last memory from the 21st century was falling asleep at my desk debugging code for a logistics application. Now I was staring at brass pipes the size of subway tunnels, each one stamped with Gothic script and purity seals that looked disturbingly fresh. The clothes on my back had changed. Rough brown fabric that scratched against skin, heavy boots that felt like they were made from actual leather rather than synthetic materials. A small mirror shard nearby reflected a face I barely recognized. Same features, but weathered, older, marked by lines that spoke of hard labor and constant vigilance. Standing up proved more difficult than expected. My body felt different, stronger in some ways, but also carrying the weight of malnutrition and exhaustion that hadn't been there moments before. Whatever force had brought me here had given me a body that belonged to this world, one that had already lived through hardships I couldn't remember. The tunnel stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness, punctuated by the occasional flicker of lumens that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Emergency lighting, I realized, noting the red filters and intermittent pattern. Something was wrong in this section of the hive. I chose left arbitrarily and began walking, my footsteps echoing off the curved walls. The sound drew unwanted attention. Something skittered in the darkness behind me, keeping pace but staying just outside the light. Not human footsteps, too many legs, moving with coordination that spoke of hive intelligence. 20 minutes of walking brought me to a junction where multiple tunnels converged. Here, evidence of recent human presence became clear. Scattered belongings, dried bloodstains, and scratch marks on the walls that definitely weren't made by maintenance tools. The scratches formed patterns, almost like writing, but using symbols that hurt to look at directly. A sound from ahead made me freeze. Voices, human voices, speaking low Gothic with the distinctive accent of Mordian workers. They were arguing about something, their words echoing down the tunnel in fragments. Saw them take the Anderson family. Nothing we can do. Enforcers won't come down here anymore. Following the voices led to a wider chamber where perhaps 30 people had set up a makeshift camp. Families huddled around small fires, burning what looked like furniture and paper for warmth. Children with the too old eyes of those who've seen horrors sat quietly while adults spoke in hushed tones about rationing their remaining rations. They looked up as I approached, hands moving instinctively to improvised weapons, pipe wrenches, broken bottles, a few actual blades that gleamed with careful maintenance. These people had been down here for weeks, maybe months, and they'd learned to be suspicious of strangers. "New face," said an older woman with greying hair tied back severely. Her voice carried authority despite their circumstances. "Don't recognize you from the manufactorum levels. What's your designation?" The question hung in the air while I struggled to understand what she meant. Designation suggested some kind of work assignment or identification code. In this world, everyone had a place in the hierarchy, a function to serve the Emperor's will. Being unassigned, unaccounted for, was dangerous. Lost my papers, I said finally, hoping the explanation would suffice. Tunnel collapse up in Section 7. Been wandering for days. The woman studied me carefully, taking in details I probably wasn't even aware of. The cut of my clothes, the condition of my hands, the way I held myself. In a hive city with billions of inhabitants, reading people quickly was a survival skill. Mira Cordwen, she said eventually. Hab block coordinator for level 94. These are my people. The introduction came with a gesture encompassing the entire group. We've been down here since the incident started. Lost contact with the administratum 3 weeks ago. Incidents. The word carried weight, implying something specific that everyone present understood, but didn't want to name directly. In the 40K universe, there were many things that fell under the category of incidents, and most of them involved death on a massive scale. What kind of incidents? I asked, though part of me already suspected I didn't want to know the answer. Mira's expression darkened. Started with missing persons reports, workers not showing up for their shifts, families disappearing from their HAB units. Then the enforcers stopped responding to calls from our sector. Last week, power got cut to the upper levels. No word from above since then. She pointed toward a tunnel entrance that had been barricaded with scavenged metal plates. Things come from that direction now, at night mostly, but sometimes during the sleep cycle. They sound human when they call for help. But, she paused, struggling with how to explain something that defied rational description. But they're not anymore. The implications sent ice through my veins. In Warhammer 40K, when people started disappearing and things that used to be human began hunting in the dark, it usually meant one of several possibilities: chaos corruption, Genestealer infestation, or worse. None of the options ended well for ordinary civilians. How long have you been down here? I asked. Since the first wave of disappearances, Mira replied. 28 days by my count. We've been living on emergency rations and what we can scavenge from abandoned sections. It's not sustainable much longer. Looking around the makeshift camp, I could see she was right. These people were dying slowly, malnutrition, stress, and despair taking their toll. Children who should have been energetic sat listlessly. Adults moved with the careful economy of those conserving their strength. This wasn't survival, it was a slow death with extra steps. There has to be a way to get word to the authorities, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how naive they sounded. Several people laughed bitterly. A younger man with burn scars on his hands spoke up. Authorities? The enforcers won't come down this far even in good times. The ecclesiarchy cares about souls, not bodies. And the administratum. He made a gesture that probably qualified as mild heresy. They've probably already filed us as acceptable losses and moved on. The harsh reality of the Imperium hit me like a physical blow. In my old world, people disappeared and others looked for them. Here, people disappeared and were simply written off as the cost of keeping humanity alive for another day. Individual lives mattered only in how they served the larger machine of survival. So, what's the plan? I asked. Mira looked at me with something that might have been approval. Survive another day. Find a way to get the children to safety. Hope that whatever's hunting us gets distracted by easier prey. She paused, then added quietly, and pray to the Emperor that death comes quickly when it finally finds us. Welcome to Warhammer 40K, I thought grimly, where hope is heresy and despair is just another day ending in Y. Chapter 2. The First Hunt. The things came during the 4th hour of the sleep cycle, when the darkness felt deepest and human vigilance naturally flagged. I'd been with Mira's group for 3 days by then, long enough to understand their rhythm of fear, but not long enough to truly comprehend what they were afraid of. The first sign was the smell, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water, mixed with something metallic that made my teeth ache. It drifted down the tunnel from the barricaded section, carrying with it whispers that almost sounded like prayers. I was on watch duty with Carrick, the burned worker who'd explained Imperial priorities with such bitter eloquence. He grabbed my arm when the scent reached us, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "Wake them," he whispered. "Wake them quiet." But there wasn't time. The barricade exploded inward with a shriek of rending metal that echoed through the tunnel system like a cathedral bell. What came through the gap defied immediate comprehension. Shapes that had once been human, but were now something else. Something improved according to a logic that no sane mind could follow. The first one through stood 7 feet tall on legs that bent wrong at too many joints. Its arms ended in hands that sprouted fingers like flower petals, each one tipped with bone that gleamed wet in the firelight. Where its face should have been was a mass of sensory organs that pulsed with their own bioluminescence. Eyes and mouths and things that might have been both, all focused on the huddled families with predatory hunger. "Blessed children," it spoke, with a voice like honey poured over broken glass. "Come to us. Let us show you perfection." More shapes poured through the breach, each one unique in its violation of human anatomy. Some crawled on limbs that ended in grasping maws. Others walked upright but trailed organ vines that left phosphorescent slime on the tunnel walls. All of them had been people once. You could see it in the fragments of clothing that had not been absorbed into new flesh, in the half-familiar shapes of bones beneath skin that had become something more flexible than human anatomy allowed. The camp erupted into chaos. Families scrambled for the prepared escape routes, while the few adults with weapons formed a desperate rear guard. Mira appeared beside me with a laser gun that looked ancient but well-maintained, its power pack glowing with a full charge. "The children first," she shouted over the inhuman chorus of hunting calls. "Everything else is expendable." Carrick had produced a flamer from somewhere, a stubby weapon that belched promethium in a wide arc. The burning fuel washed over the nearest creatures, and they screamed, not in pain, but in what sounded almost like ecstasy. Their altered flesh bubbled and reformed, incorporating the fire into new configurations of impossible biology. "They're not dying," I yelled, stating the obvious, because my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. "Genestealer touched," Mira replied grimly, picking off one of the creatures with a precise las blast that punched through its center mass. It staggered but kept coming, already beginning to seal the wound with rapid tissue growth. 3rd or 4th generation by the look of them. Too far gone for normal weapons. Genestealer. The word hit me like ice water as my 40K knowledge kicked in. These weren't chaos mutations or some local plague. They were the products of xenobreed contamination, humans whose genetic structure had been slowly rewritten over generations by alien parasites. And if these were 3rd or 4th generation hybrids, that meant... "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, while helping a family with small children reach the escape tunnel. "Decades," Mira said, switching to her backup power pack with practiced efficiency. "Maybe longer. The signs were always there if you knew what to look for. Increased birth rates in certain families, children born with gifts that made them valuable to the cult of the perfect form. We thought it was just another Emperor-blessed mutation line. The cult of the perfect form. Of course there would be a religious front for the infestation. In the Imperium, everything had to be wrapped in faith and devotion. Even humanity's slow replacement by alien progeny. A smaller hybrid, one that still looked mostly human except for the 3rd arm growing from its ribcage, lunged at a fleeing child. Without thinking, I grabbed a piece of broken rebar and drove it through the creature's head. The impact jarred my arms, but the hybrid dropped, dark fluid leaking from the wound. "Aim for the brainstem," Mira called out. "It's the only part they can't regenerate quickly." Good advice, but hard to implement when the target kept moving and your weapon was a piece of scrap metal. Around me, the desperate battle continued as more hybrids poured through the breach. They weren't just attacking, they were herding, driving the fleeing humans towards specific tunnel entrances while cutting off others. "It's a trap," I realized aloud. "They're pushing us somewhere." Mira's expression turned grim as she reached the same conclusion. "The breeding chambers. They want to take us alive." The thought of being captured by Genestealer hybrids made my stomach clench with terror. In the 40K universe, there were fates far worse than death, and becoming a host for alien reproduction was definitely among them. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones lived long enough to birth something that wore their face while hunting their former friends. "Everyone, scatter pattern 3, Mira commanded, and immediately the fleeing civilians broke into smaller groups, each heading for different escape routes. It was a desperate gambit. Some groups would make it to safety while others would be run down, but it was better than being herded en masse to whatever fate the hybrids had planned. I found myself running alongside Carrick and 3 other adults, following a narrow maintenance tunnel that angled upward toward what I hoped were safer levels. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit echoed off the walls, inhuman calls, the scrape of claws on metal, and underneath it all a rhythmic chanting in a language that made my ears hurt. "Where does this lead?" I gasped, my lungs burning from exertion and the chemical-tainted air. "Water treatment facility," Carrick replied. "Should be abandoned, but there's access to the main transit network from there." Should be abandoned. In Warhammer 40K, should be was a phrase that got people killed with depressing regularity. But we didn't have any better options, so we kept running while the sounds of pursuit grew closer. The tunnel ended at a heavy blast door marked with warnings in Gothic script. Carrick produced a security key from his pocket. Apparently his job in the manufactorum had given him access to infrastructure systems. The door cycled open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a chamber filled with massive filtration tanks and processing equipment. "Sweet Emperor," one of the other adults whispered. The facility wasn't abandoned. It was occupied, but not by anything human. Webs of organic material connected the tanks and pipes, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that suggested some kind of communication network. In the center of the chamber, something that might once have been a water treatment plant supervisor hung suspended in a cocoon of alien flesh, tubes running from its body to various pieces of equipment. "They've been here for years," Carrick said quietly, "controlling the water supply, introducing genetic material into the entire hive population." The implications were staggering. If the Genestealers had compromised the water treatment facility, then potentially millions of people had been exposed to low-level genetic corruption over years or decades. The hybrids we'd fought were an isolated outbreak. They were the tip of an iceberg that stretched throughout the entire hive city. Sounds from the tunnel behind us indicated that our pursuers had found our trail. We had perhaps minutes before they caught up, and nowhere left to run. The water treatment facility was a dead end, surrounded by processing tanks and industrial equipment that offered no viable escape routes. "There," Carrick pointed to a communications console near the far wall. "If we can get a message out, warn the authorities." It was a desperate hope, but it was all we had. We sprinted across the chamber while organic sensors tracked our movement and pulsed warning signals through the bio-network. Behind us, hybrid voices echoed from the tunnel, growing closer with each passing second. I reached the console first and began working the controls, grateful for technical knowledge that seemed to translate across 40,000 years of human development. The system was corrupted but functional, infected with alien biocircuitry that had integrated itself into the Imperial technology. A connection established, weak but stable. The receiving station identified itself as Enforcement Precinct 7, upper hive levels. An authoritarian voice crackled through the static. "Unauthorized transmission. Identify yourself immediately." "Genestealer infestation in the lower levels," I transmitted rapidly. "Multiple generations. They've compromised the water treatment systems. The entire hive is at risk." Silence stretched for long seconds. Then, "Transmission terminated. This frequency is now classified." The console went dark. Behind us, the first hybrid appeared in the doorway, its impossible anatomy silhouetted against the tunnel lighting. It looked at us with clusters of eyes that held disturbingly human intelligence and smiled with a mouth that contained far too many teeth. "Children," it said gently, "you cannot run from perfection forever." And I realized with growing horror that maybe the enforcers hadn't terminated our transmission due to skepticism or incompetence. Maybe they'd terminated it because they already knew about the infestation, because they were part of it, because in a universe where survival required constant vigilance against threats beyond human comprehension, sometimes the only way to save the majority was to sacrifice the few who learned too much. Welcome to Day 6 in Warhammer 40K, where even calling for help could get you killed. Chapter 3. The Bitter Truth. The hybrid didn't attack immediately, and that was somehow worse than if it had simply rushed us with claws extended. Instead, it stood in the doorway, with an almost paternal expression on its malformed features, studying us the way a teacher might examine particularly slow students. "Marcus Chen," it said, and my blood turned to ice. "Software engineer, 21st century Earth. You've been here 6 days now, and you still don't understand what's happening." The impossibility of it knowing my name and origin hit me like a physical blow. I'd told no one about my past, barely understood it myself. Yet this creature, this thing that had once been human, spoke with certainty about details I'd shared with nobody. "How do you—" I began, but it raised one of its flower petal fingers in a gentle shushing gesture. "The brood mind knows all its children, Marcus. Every thought, every memory, every dream. You've been drinking the water, breathing the air, eating the rations. The sacred essence has been working in your blood for days now." Its cluster of eyes shifted to focus on my companions. "All of you, the change has already begun." Carrick raised his flamer, but his hands were shaking. "You're lying. We'd know if we were infected." The hybrid's laugh was like music played through broken glass. "Would you? Tell me, Carrick Voss, when did you last have a headache? When did you last feel truly tired? Have you noticed your reflexes improving, your night vision becoming sharper?" I watched Carrick's face pale as the creature's words hit home. Now that it mentioned it, I'd been feeling unusually alert and energetic despite the stress and poor nutrition. My eyesight in the dim tunnels had been remarkably good, better than it had any right to be. Small improvements that I'd attributed to adrenaline and adaptation, but now. "The first generation changes are subtle," the hybrid continued conversationally. "Enhanced physical capabilities, improved disease resistance, better integration with group dynamics. The Imperium calls these blessed mutations and thanks the Emperor for genetic gifts. They never question why certain bloodlines consistently produce such improvements." 2 more hybrids emerged from the tunnel behind the first, their forms showing various stages of transformation. One still looked mostly human, except for skin that had taken on a purple-grey hue and eyes that reflected light like a cat's. The other was further along, with additional limbs sprouting from its torso and facial features that had rearranged themselves into something more efficient for its new biology. "You see the progression," the first hybrid said, noticing my gaze. "Brother Valerius there was born in the deep hives, never knew anything but Imperial orthodoxy. Sister Meridian was a shrine keeper until her true nature manifested 3 years ago. Now they serve the four-armed Emperor with perfect devotion." The four-armed Emperor. Even with my limited 40K knowledge, I recognized the term as Genestealer cult terminology for their hybrid of Imperial faith and alien devotion. They weren't rejecting the Emperor's worship. They were evolving it, creating a version that served Xeno's interests while maintaining familiar religious structure. "This is insane," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. In a universe where the impossible was everyday reality, where faith could literally reshape matter and thought could manifest physical change, was genetic corruption through water supplies really so hard to believe? "Is it?" The hybrid stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of that sweet, cloying scent that preceded their appearances. "Your species has spent 40,000 years fighting for survival against enemies that want to exterminate or corrupt you. We offer partnership, evolution, a future where humanity doesn't just survive, but thrives." Sister Meridian spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the trained cadences of someone who'd spent years leading prayers. "The star gods promised eternal life through technology and delivered only slavery. Chaos offers power through corruption and brings only madness. We offer synthesis, keeping what makes you human while adding what makes you strong. It was a seductive argument, especially in a universe where the alternatives were uniformly horrific. The Imperium ground its citizens to dust in the name of survival. Chaos consumed souls for momentary power. The Tau offered enlightenment at the cost of free will. Against those options, genetic partnership with aliens that preserved personality and memory while enhancing capability seemed almost reasonable. The infestation timeline, I said, stalling for time while my mind raced. How long has this been going on in Hive Tertius? 6 centuries, Brother Valerius replied readily. We were patient, a few families at first, carefully chosen for genetic compatibility. Marriages arranged to concentrate the bloodlines. Positions in vital infrastructure secured through perfectly legal means. The administratum never noticed because we worked within their systems rather than against them. 600 years. That meant the Genestealer infestation predated most of the current Imperial institutions on this world. They hadn't conquered the hive. They'd grown up with it, becoming part of its essential structure. No wonder the enforcers had cut our transmission. They probably were part of the cult, their genetic heritage ensuring loyalty to something beyond the Emperor's light. What about the others? Carrick asked, his voice hollow. Mira's group, the families that scattered. Safe, the first hybrid assured him. Those ready for ascension will be welcomed. Those not yet prepared will be protected until their time comes. Children especially. They adapt so much more easily than adults. In a generation or two, they'll thank us for preserving them from the dying light of pure humanity. The casual mention of children sent rage flooding through my system. Whatever else these creatures were, they were talking about breeding programs involving kids who had no choice in their transformation. That crossed lines that existed regardless of universe or circumstance. And if we refuse? I asked. The hybrid's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around us. A sense of vast, patient intelligence, focusing its attention on our small group. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that resonated in my bones. Marcus Chen, you're not from this universe originally. The quantum displacement that brought you here created anomalies in your genetic structure. You're immune to standard conversion protocols. It paused, studying me with too many eyes. But your companions are not. Before I could react, Carrick doubled over with a gasp of pain. Dark veins appeared under his skin, spreading from injection sites I hadn't noticed. Tiny puncture wounds that must have been made during our flight through the tunnels. The hybrid's claws weren't just weapons. They were delivery systems for whatever agent triggered rapid transformation. Carrick! I lunged toward him, but Brother Valerius intercepted me with inhuman speed, holding me back with strength that made resistance pointless. The change doesn't have to be painful, Sister Meridian said gently, kneeling beside Carrick as his body began to shift and stretch. Accept it willingly, and consciousness remains intact throughout the process. Fight it, and, well, the end result is the same, but the journey is more difficult. I watched in horror as Carrick's burn scars faded while new features began emerging. His skeleton was restructuring itself, adding bone mass and changing joint angles to accommodate improvements in leverage and strength. His skin took on the purple-grey hue I'd seen in the other hybrid, while additional sensory organs began developing around his original eyes. But the worst part was his expression. Despite the physical transformation, Carrick's personality remained clearly visible in his changing features. He was still himself, just himself with new capabilities and loyalties that overwrote his previous concerns. When he looked at me, I saw recognition and something that might have been pity. It's not what I expected, he said, his voice already carrying new harmonics. The fear is gone, Marcus. The constant anxiety about survival, about watching family members waste away from malnutrition and disease. I can feel the strength of the community now, thousands of minds working toward the same goal. You're not human anymore, I said desperately. No, he agreed readily. I'm something better. something that doesn't have to choose between individual survival and species continuation. He stood, his new height requiring him to duck slightly to avoid the chamber's ceiling. "Join us, Marcus. You're immune to biological conversion, but there are other methods. Cybernetic integration, psychic conditioning. We have 40,000 years of technological development to work with." The offer hung in the air while I processed the implications. They weren't just recruiting through genetic corruption. They had multiple vectors for bringing people into their collective. In a universe where technology was commonly implanted into human bodies, where psychers routinely had their minds altered for stability and control, the line between voluntary improvement and forced conversion became frighteningly thin. "The water treatment facility," I said, gesturing toward the infected machinery around us. "You're not just targeting this hive. This is a template." The first hybrid nodded approvingly. 12 systems in this sector alone. Soon, an entire subsector. The beauty of working within Imperial infrastructure is that successful innovations get copied and distributed automatically. Efficiency improvements in water processing, new ration formulations with enhanced nutritional value, minor adjustments to atmospheric processors, each change spreading the sacred essence further. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. They weren't just infesting individual worlds, they were embedding themselves in the Imperium's supply chains and bureaucratic systems, using humanity's own desperate need for efficiency against itself. Every improvement they introduced made life better for ordinary citizens, while slowly preparing them for genetic modification. "And when the Tyranids arrive?" I asked, because eventually every Genestealer infestation served that purpose. "When the star gods return," Sister Meridian corrected gently, "they will find a galaxy prepared for synthesis, not victims to be consumed, but partners ready for the next phase of evolution. The Imperium's constant warfare will end. The species will finally have peace. Peace through absorption, unity through alien control." It was the same promise every tyrant in history had made, dressed up in language of improvement and cooperation. But looking at Carrick's transformed features, seeing the genuine contentment in his altered eyes, I wondered if the end result really mattered, if the process preserved what people cared about most. "Choose quickly," the first hybrid said, its patience clearly finite. "Others are already being processed. Soon the facility will be needed for more urgent purposes." Around us, the infected machinery pulsed with increased activity. New organic growths were emerging from the water treatment systems, and the bioluminescent patterns had shifted to something that looked almost like countdown sequences. Whatever the cult had planned, it was entering its final phase. I looked at my former companions, Carrick studying me with alien eyes that still held friendship. The other adults from our group beginning their own transformations in alcoves I hadn't noticed before. They seemed happy, or at least content. The fear and desperation that had marked their faces during the camp was gone, replaced by serene acceptance of their new nature. Maybe they were right. Maybe in a universe where survival required constant vigilance against threats beyond human comprehension, giving up the struggle and joining something larger wasn't surrender. It was evolution. But I thought about the children in Mira's group and how they'd looked when the hybrids first appeared. That terror in their eyes hadn't been fear of death. It had been recognition of something fundamentally wrong, something that violated natural order, even in a universe where natural order was more suggestion than law. "No," I said finally, "I won't join you." The hybrid's expression didn't change, but the air around us shifted again. "Then you'll be contained until other arrangements can be made. There are factions within the Imperium that pay well for specimens with unusual properties. Contained, sold." In Warhammer 40K, those words meant a future that made genetic assimilation look like a mercy. But at least it meant I'd face that future as myself, whatever that was worth in a universe that valued individual conscience somewhere below ammunition conservation. The hybrids moved forward with patient certainty, and I prepared to discover exactly how long someone could last in the 41st millennium while maintaining their humanity. Spoiler alert, not very long at all. Chapter 4. The Inquisition arrives. The containment didn't last as long as the hybrids expected. 3 hours after they'd sedated me and locked me in what used to be a chemical storage tank, the entire water treatment facility shook with the distinctive thunder of orbital bombardment. Through the tank's small observation window, I watched bioluminescent networks flicker and die as Imperial fire found its targets throughout the complex. When the armored figures breached the chamber wall with melter charges, I initially felt relief. Finally, proper Imperial forces had arrived to deal with the Genestealer infestation. That relief lasted approximately 30 seconds, until I got a clear look at their armor's iconography and realized I'd jumped from the frying pan into the plasma reactor. Inquisition. The Ordo Xenos kill team that extracted me from the hybrid facility consisted of 4 individuals who made the Genestealers look friendly by comparison. Their leader, a woman whose name I'd later learn was Interrogator Castiel Vaughn, wore power armor decorated with enough purity seals to suggest either great faith or great paranoia. Given the Inquisition's reputation, probably both. Specimen secured, she voxed to someone as her team dragged me from the tank. Genetic anomaly confirmed. Beginning immediate transport to investigation facility. Specimen, not survivor, not rescued civilian. The distinction was important in ways that made my stomach clench with new varieties of fear. To the Inquisition, I wasn't a person who needed help. I was a thing that required study. The extraction took place under covering fire from overhead gunships that turned the surrounding tunnel networks into molten slag. Whatever the Genestealers had built in the water treatment facility, the Inquisition was making sure none of it survived their departure. The casual thoroughness with which they obliterated decades of alien construction suggested this wasn't their first purge operation. Transport window closing, reported the team's tech specialist, his Vox unit crackling with static. Orbital fire mission commencing in 30 seconds. We made it to the extraction point, a reinforced lift platform, with time to spare. As the platform rose toward the surface, I caught a final glimpse of the hive's lower levels through the lift shaft's armored viewing port. The Inquisition wasn't just cleaning out the Genestealer infestation. They were sterilizing entire sections of city. Promethium fires spread through residential areas, while macro cannon rounds reduced industrial sectors to rubble. Collateral damage assessment, I asked Vaughn, trying to sound like someone with legitimate authority to request information. She turned toward me, and I got my first clear look at her face through the helmet's eye lenses. Augmetic implants replaced her left eye and most of the surrounding facial structure, while ritual scarification covered the visible skin in patterns that probably had theological significance. When she spoke, her voice carried the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. 17 million souls, she said matter-of-factly. Acceptable losses for a Class Omega xenological threat. The infestation had reached 4th-generation saturation throughout the affected zones. 17 million people. Dead because genetic corruption had spread too far to contain through selective elimination. In my original universe, that would have been one of history's greatest disasters. Here, it was classified as acceptable losses and filed away as a successful operation. The children, I said, thinking about the families from Mira's group. Some of them weren't infected yet. Irrelevant. Vaughn's tone didn't change. 4th-generation saturation means extensive genetic compromise throughout the population. Distinguishing between pure and corrupted bloodlines would require resources better spent on prevention in uncontaminated zones. We reached the surface as she spoke, emerging into a staging area where Inquisition forces coordinated the systematic destruction of everything below. Orbital fire control stations tracked targets throughout the hive, while Medici teams processed refugees from uncontaminated sectors. The operation was running with clockwork precision, every element coordinated to maximize efficiency while minimizing resource expenditure. But the refugees, hundreds of thousands of people standing in neat processing lines, weren't being evacuated to safety. They were being sorted. Genetic scanners identified bloodline markers, while Inquisition staff consulted data slates and made notations next to names. Acceptable families were being loaded onto transport ships. Others were being directed toward holding areas that looked disturbingly permanent. Quality control, Vaughan explained, noting my attention. 6 centuries of gradual infiltration means we can't trust normal screening procedures. Every surviving bloodline requires verification against pure genetic templates before relocation approval. Quality control, testing hundreds of thousands of people for alien contamination while their home burned around them. The scope of the operation was staggering, but what impressed me most was how routine it seemed to everyone involved. This wasn't an emergency response, it was standard procedure, practiced often enough that every participant knew their role exactly. A junior inquisitor approached our group, his armor bearing the fresh scars of recent combat. Interrogator Vaughan, we've completed sector scans. Biomass integration reached 87% in the affected zones. Recovery was impossible. Confirmed. Vaughan made a notation on her data slate. Begin sterilization protocol 7. Full cleansing. No organic matter preserved. Sterilization protocol 7. I didn't want to know what protocols 1 through 6 involved, but 7 apparently meant reducing everything in the contaminated zones to component atoms. Through the staging area's force field barriers, new fires were beginning to spread. Chemical flames that burned with colors that shouldn't exist, consuming organic matter so completely that not even ash remained. Transport secured, another team member reported. Investigation facility stands ready for specimen delivery. We boarded a Thunderhawk gunship for the journey to wherever the Inquisition conducted its research. The transport's interior was configured for prisoner containment rather than passenger comfort, with restraint systems designed to hold everything from human dissidents to captured xeno specimens. I rated electromagnetic shackles and a neural dampening collar. Apparently, they considered me dangerous despite my obvious helplessness. During the flight, I had time to observe my captors more closely. Vaughan commanded the team with absolute authority, but her subordinates weren't mindless automatons. They discussed technical details of the purge operation, shared opinions about optimal resource allocation, even made what might have been jokes about assignment preferences. These were intelligent, dedicated professionals who happened to work in humanity's most ruthless organization. Why extract me? I asked Vaughan during a lull in their operational discussions. If I'm immune to Genestealer infection, wouldn't it be easier to just kill me and file a report? Easier, yes, she agreed readily. But your immunity suggests genetic anomalies with potential research value. The Ordo Biologis has standing requisitions for specimens displaying unusual xenos resistance. Your cellular structure might provide insights useful for developing improved screening techniques. Research value. Medical experimentation disguised as xenological study. In Warhammer 40K, advancing human knowledge often involved practices that would have been considered atrocities in more civilized times. But then, more civilized times didn't have to deal with threats that could corrupt entire species through gradual genetic modification. What happens to test subjects after the research concludes? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Depends on results, Vaughan replied with characteristic directness. Useful specimens might be preserved for additional studies. Others are typically recycled through standard disposal procedures. Disposal procedures. At least she wasn't pretending this would end well for me. In a perverse way, I appreciated the honesty. Too many organizations in my original universe had dressed up atrocities in euphemistic language and false promises. The Inquisition might be planning to dissect me for science, but they weren't lying about it. The Thunderhawk's descent toward our destination interrupted my philosophical musings about Imperial honesty. Through the transport's viewing ports, I watched a sprawling complex of reinforced structures emerge from the planetary surface. Guard towers, weapons emplacements, and void shields indicated serious defensive preparations. Whatever the Inquisition studied here, they clearly expected someone to try stopping them. Investigation Facility Tertius, Vaughan announced as we touched down on a landing platform surrounded by armed sentries. Primary xenological research installation for this sector. Your home for the foreseeable future. The facility's interior was exactly what I'd expected from an Inquisition research complex. Sterile corridors lined with containment cells, laboratories equipped with instruments whose purpose I didn't want to contemplate, and staff members who regarded specimens with the detached interest of scientists studying interesting bacteria. My cell was comfortable enough. Clean bed, basic hygiene facilities, food delivery slot. But the energy barriers and monitoring systems made the imprisonment obvious. Specimen 774 Gamma, the duty officer informed me while updating my containment records. Dr. Hadrian Kesh will oversee your case. Research schedule begins tomorrow at the 4th hour. Cooperation is appreciated, but not required. Cooperation not required. That suggested they had ways of extracting information that didn't depend on willing participation. In a universe where technology could read memories directly from brain tissue, traditional interrogation techniques were probably considered charmingly old-fashioned. My first night in Imperial custody was spent reviewing everything I knew about Inquisition research methods. Most of it came from game lore and novels, which probably weren't reliable sources for actual procedures, but they painted a consistent picture of thoroughness taken to horrific extremes. The Inquisition didn't just study their subjects, they took them apart at the molecular level to understand how they functioned. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by sounds from other containment cells. Some of the noises were recognizably human: sobbing, prayers, occasional screams. Others definitely weren't. The Inquisition clearly had a diverse collection of research subjects, and not all of them had originally been human. Morning arrived with automated food delivery and a Vox announcement that specimen 774 Gamma should prepare for initial examination. 2 guards in powered armor escorted me through corridors lined with cells containing things I tried not to look at too closely. Whatever the Inquisition was studying, they'd collected examples from across the galaxy's most dangerous species. Dr. Hadrian Kesh turned out to be a surprisingly normal-looking man in his 60s, with grey hair and kind eyes that completely failed to match his reputation for innovative vivisection techniques. His laboratory was appointed like a medical facility, complete with examination tables, monitoring equipment, and restraint systems that could accommodate subjects ranging from human-sized to greater demon class. Specimen 774 Gamma, he greeted me with what seemed like genuine warmth. Please have a seat. We have a great deal to discuss. The examination table he indicated was equipped with neural interface ports and biochemical analysis systems. Sitting down would give him access to my complete biological profile, probably including memories and psychological structure. In my original universe, such comprehensive scanning would have required informed consent and ethical oversight. Here, it was apparently just Tuesday morning. What exactly are you studying? I asked while remaining standing. Genetic immunity to xenological corruption, Kesh replied matter-of-factly. Your resistance to Genestealer infestation suggests unusual cellular properties that might be replicated in other subjects. If we can understand the mechanism, we might develop preventive treatments for populations at risk. It sounded almost reasonable when he explained it that way. Medical research designed to protect people from alien corruption was clearly beneficial to humanity's survival. The fact that it involved dismantling me at the cellular level was just an unfortunate necessity in the pursuit of greater good. And if I refused to cooperate? I asked. Kesh's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Then we proceed with non-consensual protocols. The research will take longer and the results might be less precise, but the end goal remains achievable. Non-consensual protocols. Medical torture disguised as scientific necessity. Looking around the laboratory, I could see equipment designed for exactly that purpose. Restraint systems that could hold struggling subjects, monitoring devices that would track vital signs during procedures, surgical implements that prioritized information gathering over patient comfort. How long do I have? I asked. To decide about cooperation, as long as you need, Kesh said gently. But the research will begin either way. Your comfort level during the process is the only variable under discussion. I thought about the 17 million people who died in the hive purge, about the families that had been sorted and processed like industrial products, about the children who'd been classified as acceptable losses in the war against alien corruption. In the context of those numbers, My individual suffering was barely a rounding error in the Imperium's survival calculations, but I was still myself, whatever that meant in a universe where identity could be rewritten at the genetic level. Whatever happened next, I'd face it as Marcus Chen, former software engineer, current specimen in humanity's endless war against extinction. "Let's get started," I said, sitting down on the examination table. Dr. Kesh smiled with what looked like genuine approval. "Excellent. Now, let's see what makes you so special." The neural interface activated with a sensation like ice water flooding my brain, and I discovered that some things really were worse than death in the 41st millennium. Chapter 5. The Emperor's Mercy. The neural scanning lasted 18 hours and felt like 18 years. Dr. Kesh's equipment didn't just read my memories, it catalogued them, cross-referenced them, and compared them against xenological threat databases that contained 40,000 years of accumulated knowledge about how aliens corrupted human consciousness. When the process finally ended, I understood why most subjects didn't survive it intact. "Fascinating," Kesh murmured, reviewing data streams that painted my entire existence in clinical detail. "Your genetic immunity stems from quantum displacement anomalies. The process that brought you to this universe fundamentally altered your cellular structure at the subatomic level. No wonder standard corruption vectors have no effect." Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, I could see other research subjects being prepared for their own examinations. A man whose skin had taken on the metallic sheen of Necron influence. A woman whose eyes held the swirling colors of warp exposure. Children whose mutations suggested contact with something that defied classification entirely. All of them would be studied until their uniqueness was completely understood, then archived as data points in humanity's survival manual. "Can it be replicated?" I asked, though speaking required effort after the neural probe's invasion. "Possibly," Kesh replied, his attention split between my scan results and new subjects being delivered to adjacent chambers. "The quantum manipulation required would be extraordinarily complex, but the theoretical framework exists. We might be able to induce similar anomalies in volunteer test subjects." Volunteer test subjects. Even in the Inquisition's most classified facilities, they maintained the fiction that people chose to participate in potentially lethal experiments. The paperwork probably included consent forms and liability waivers, properly notarized and filed according to administrative regulations. "How many would survive the process?" I pressed. Kesh consulted his data slate, comparing my results against historical experiments. Initial estimates suggest survival rates around 12%. However, successful subjects would be permanently immune to all known forms of xenological corruption. From a strategic perspective, the losses would be acceptable. 12% survival. That meant 88% of test subjects would die horribly, so that a few could gain immunity to alien influence. In a universe where entire planets were routinely sacrificed to prevent demon incursions, those odds probably qualified as optimistic. "When do the experiments begin?" I asked. "They already have," Kesh said gently. "Your scan data is being transmitted to research facilities throughout the sector. Within weeks, we'll begin selecting candidates for the first test series. Your contribution to humanity's survival will be significant." My contribution. The phrasing made it sound like I'd volunteered for martyrdom rather than been kidnapped for vivisection. But results were what mattered, and if my torture could prevent Genestealer infestations from claiming millions more lives, perhaps the mathematics of suffering balanced favorably. An alarm klaxon interrupted my philosophical calculations about acceptable casualties. Emergency lighting flooded the laboratory as blast doors began cycling shut throughout the facility. Through the reinforced windows, I could see security teams rushing toward defensive positions, while automated weapon systems emerged from concealed mountings. "External attack," Kesh announced, his earlier calm replaced by professional urgency. "Orbital scans indicate multiple incoming threats. Xenological signatures confirmed." Xenological signatures. That could mean anything from orc raiders to tyrannid scout swarms. But given the facility's research focus, I suspected our visitors had more personal motivations than random violence. somewhere among the Inquisition's collection of test subjects, someone had friends who objected to their current accommodations. Containment breach in Sector 7. A Vox speaker crackled with updates from Security Central. Unknown hostile entities demonstrating advanced infiltration capabilities. All research staff to protected positions immediately. Kesh began shutting down his equipment with practiced efficiency, securing research data and biological samples against potential loss. Whatever was attacking the facility, he'd clearly dealt with similar emergencies before. The Inquisition's enemies were numerous and creative, making security breaches an occupational hazard rather than unprecedented crisis. "What happens to the test subjects during attacks?" I asked while he worked. "Automated containment protocols," Kesh replied without looking up from his console. "Cells are sealed, life support switches to emergency reserves, and defensive systems activate to prevent rescue attempts. Most subjects survive the standard 6-hour siege duration. Most subjects. The qualification suggested that some containment cells were considered more expendable than others, probably based on research value and strategic importance. As specimen 774 Gamma with unique genetic properties, I probably rated protection. Others might not be so fortunate. The laboratory's blast doors finished their cycling, sealing us inside with armor plating designed to withstand macro cannon fire. Kesh activated additional security measures, energy barriers, automated defensive turrets, and warning systems that would alert Central Command if our position was compromised. The Inquisition took protecting their research very seriously. Breach in Sector 4. The Vox speaker continued its updates. Hostile entities identified as Eldari infiltration specialists. Estimated force composition, 12 operatives with advanced stealth capabilities. Eldari. Eldar, in the older terminology I was familiar with. That explained the sophisticated infiltration. Eldar technology could make their warriors effectively invisible to Imperial sensors when they chose stealth over direct confrontation. But why would they attack an Inquisition research facility? Eldar typically avoided human conflicts unless their own interests were directly threatened. Unless, I said aloud, understanding flooding through me, they're here for specific prisoners. Kesh glanced up from his console with sharp attention. "Explain that assessment." "Eldar can see potential futures through psychic divination," I said, remembering lore details about their prophetic abilities. "If your research data leads to experiments that create a permanent human immunity to corruption, that might interfere with their long-term plans for managing galactic threats." The doctor's expression shifted from mild interest to focused concern. "Continue. Eldar strategy often involves manipulating other species to fight their battles. If humans become immune to chaos and Xenos corruption, we might survive long enough to become a threat to Eldar interests. They could be here to steal your research, destroy it, or eliminate key specimens before the immunity can be replicated." Kesh was already activating emergency protocols, transmitting research data to secure off-site storage while purging local systems. "Specimen 774 Gamma, your analysis suggests significant strategic implications. If correct, this facility's defense becomes a matter of species survival rather than routine security." Species survival. The casual way he escalated from protecting research to saving humanity illustrated how the Inquisition thought about their work. Every investigation, every experiment, every torture session was conducted in service of preventing human extinction. Individual suffering was tragic but necessary. Species death was unthinkable catastrophe. "Sector 2 compromised," the Vox speaker announced. "Eldar forces moving toward primary research levels. Estimated arrival at critical facilities in 17 minutes. 17 minutes until alien specialists reached the laboratories where humanity's most sensitive research was conducted." Kesh began implementing final security measures, data destruction protocols, specimen termination systems, and what appeared to be facility self-destruct preparations. The Inquisition would rather lose everything than allow strategic knowledge to fall into Xenos hands. "The other test subjects," I said, thinking about the man with metallic skin and the woman with warp-touched eyes. "They're going to be killed rather than rescued." "Necessary," Kesh confirmed without emotion. Their research value doesn't justify risking xenological acquisition of their unique properties. Acceptable losses in service of larger strategic objectives. Acceptable losses. The phrase followed me everywhere in this universe, applied to everything from individual lives to entire star systems. In the context of a galaxy where extinction was always one mistake away, maybe such calculations were indeed necessary. But knowing the mathematics didn't make witnessing them any easier. An explosion somewhere in the facility shook the laboratory hard enough to rattle equipment in its secured mounts. Emergency lighting flickered, while backup power systems engaged with mechanical grinding that suggested age and hard use. Whatever the Eldar were doing to the facility's defenses, they were making steady progress toward their objectives. Specimen 774 Gamma, Kesh said, his voice taking on formal tones. Imperial regulations require me to inform you that facility compromise appears likely. Standard protocol grants test subjects the option of summary execution rather than potential capture by hostile forces. Summary execution. The Emperor's mercy, in official terminology. Death as preferable alternative to whatever enemies might do with captured prisoners. In a universe where fates worse than death were common currency, the offer had a certain practical appeal. What would the Eldar want with me? I asked. Unknown, Kesh admitted. Your immunity to corruption might be valuable for their own research purposes. Alternatively, they might consider your unique properties a threat to their manipulations of galactic evolution. Eldar motivations are complex. Complex was one way to describe a species whose plans spanned millennia and whose definition of acceptable casualties included entire civilizations. If the Eldar had decided my existence threatened their long-term survival strategies, they'd remove me with the same casual efficiency they'd demonstrated in countless other conflicts. How long until they reach this section? I asked. 11 minutes, Kesh replied, checking his security monitors. Possibly less if they've compromised our defensive grid communications. 11 minutes to decide between Imperial execution and alien capture. Both options ended with my death, but the Imperial version would be quick and clean while the Eldar alternative might involve interrogation techniques that made Inquisition research look gentle. The mathematics of suffering suggested choosing the Emperor's mercy, but I thought about the 17 million people who died in the hive purge, about the research subjects who were being terminated to prevent xenological acquisition, about the children who'd been classified as acceptable losses in the endless war for human survival. Everywhere I'd been in this universe, the solution to complex problems was always more death, more sacrifice, more acceptable losses in service of larger objectives. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. Dr. Kesh, I said, what if we offered them what they came for? His attention snapped to me with laser focus. Explain. They want to prevent your research from creating immunity to corruption. Instead of fighting them, we could negotiate. Offer to limit the research, modify the experimental parameters, find solutions that address their concerns without abandoning human interests entirely. Kesh stared at me as if I'd suggested worshipping the dark gods. Negotiate with Xenos? Compromise strategic research for alien approval? Such actions would constitute treason of the highest order. And the alternative is losing everything, I pointed out. Your research, your facility, your test subjects, your staff. If they succeed in their raid, humanity gets nothing. If we find middle ground, maybe both species benefit. The concept of compromise with aliens was so far outside Imperial doctrine that Kesh seemed genuinely unable to process it. In a universe where Xenos were categorically viewed as threats to human survival, the idea of mutually beneficial cooperation was literally heretical thinking. 6 minutes, the Vox speaker announced. Eldar forces have breached primary security. Kesh looked at his monitoring systems, then at me, then at the emergency termination controls that would end both our lives before alien capture became possible. Whatever decision he made in the next few minutes would determine whether humanity's greatest research breakthrough died with us or found some other path forward. There is precedent, he said slowly, for strategic cooperation under extreme circumstances. The Tau have occasionally... The Tau are naive idealists, I interrupted. The Eldar are pragmatic survivors. They've been fighting galactic extinction threats for longer than humanity has existed. If anyone understands the mathematics of species survival, it's them. 3 minutes left. Outside the laboratory, the sounds of combat were growing closer as Eldar infiltrators systematically dismantled the facility's defenses. Soon, they'd reach the research levels, and we'd discover whether 40,000 years of human xenophobia could adapt to changing circumstances, or whether the Emperor's mercy was indeed the kindest option available in a universe where even hope had become heresy. Incoming transmission, the Vox speaker crackled. Xenos communication on Imperial frequencies. Message begins. We seek dialogue with research specimen designation 774 Gamma. Cessation of hostilities possible if cooperation is offered. They knew my designation. They'd infiltrated Imperial communications. And they wanted to talk. Time to find out if the 41st millennium had room for solutions that didn't end in acceptable losses. Chapter 6. Unexpected Allies. The Eldar who entered Dr. Kesh's laboratory moved with fluid grace that made human augmented reflexes look clumsy by comparison. Her armor was a masterwork of crystalline technology that seemed to shift between transparency and opacity as she moved, while weapons that probably violated several laws of physics hung from mounts that defied geometric logic. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonic frequencies that resonated in ways human ears weren't designed to process. I am Farseer Ayana Arianal of Craftworld Aletok, she announced with formal precision. I seek audience with the specimen whose temporal displacement threatens the web of fate. Temporal displacement. They knew about my origin in ways that even Inquisition scanning hadn't fully revealed. Whatever psychic divination the Eldar used to see possible futures, it apparently included access to information about my previous universe and the circumstances that had brought me here. Dr. Kesh had his bolt pistol drawn but hadn't fired, apparently recognizing that shooting a Farseer at point-blank range would likely result in his immediate death. Instead, he maintained a defensive posture while keeping communication channels open, professional pragmatism overriding xenophobic doctrine when survival was at stake. Farseer, I said, stepping forward slightly, you went to considerable trouble to reach me. What do you want to discuss? Iana's attention focused on me with intensity that felt like standing under a searchlight. When she spoke, I had the unsettling sensation that she was addressing multiple versions of me simultaneously, seeing potential conversations across different timeline branches. Your existence creates ripples in causality that threaten outcomes we have spent millennia arranging, she said. The immunity to corruption that Imperial research will derive from your genetic structure alters the balance of power in ways that ensure mutual extinction. Mutual extinction. Not just human extinction, but Eldar extinction as well. That suggested the timeline threats were more complex than simple species competition. In a universe where chaos, tyranids, and necrons all posed existential threats to biological life, maybe human and Eldar survival were more interconnected than either species liked to admit. Explain the threat, I said. What happens if the research succeeds? Iana consulted what looked like a crystal data storage device, her expression shifting through patterns that probably had cultural significance I couldn't interpret. Immunity to corruption enables human expansion beyond current containment boundaries. Within 3 centuries, your species achieves technological parity with pre-fall Eldari civilization. Within 5 centuries, you develop weapons capable of severing the warp entirely from material reality. Severing the warp. The implications made my mind reel. In Warhammer 40K, the warp was fundamental to faster-than-light travel, psychic communication, and most advanced technology. Cutting that connection would revolutionize the galaxy's entire structure, but it would also eliminate the Eldar's primary advantages over younger species. And that's bad because? Dr. Kesh asked, his academic curiosity apparently overriding his survival instincts. Because warp severance destroys the mechanisms that contain the Citan, Iana replied with flat certainty. The Necron Star gods would awaken without limitation, beginning immediate extermination of all biological life. Your species gains immunity to corruption just in time to be harvested by entities that predate organic evolution. The Citan, Necron star gods whose power had been imprisoned in techno-arcane matrices for millions of years. If warp-based containment systems were fundamental to keeping them locked away, then severing humanity's connection to the Imperium would indeed doom every living thing in the galaxy. So what do you propose? I asked. Selective modification of your research parameters, Iana said, producing additional crystal devices from her armor's storage systems. We provide technology that allows limited immunity development without enabling complete corruption resistance. Humans gain protection against current threats while maintaining vulnerability to corrective measures if expansion becomes problematic. Corrective measures. Euphemistic language for alien intervention to prevent human advancement beyond acceptable boundaries. The Eldar were offering to help humanity survive current threats while ensuring we remain controllable for the foreseeable future. That's completely unacceptable, Kesh said immediately. Voluntary limitation of human development for alien convenience violates every principle of Imperial doctrine. Your principles will prove irrelevant when the Satan reduce Terra to component atoms, Iana replied without heat. We offer partnership in survival rather than mutual extinction through pride. Partnership. The word carried implications that went far beyond immediate tactical cooperation. If the Eldar were proposing long-term collaboration with humanity, it suggested threats that made their ancient hatred of younger species seem trivial by comparison. What other threats are you seeing? I asked, sensing there were elements of the situation she hadn't mentioned yet. Iana's expression shifted to something that might have been approval for perceptive questioning. The Great Devourer approaches from galactic rimward vectors earlier than our previous calculations predicted. Tyranid hive fleets will arrive in this sector within 6 decades rather than 6 centuries. Uncontrolled human expansion will ensure you encounter them before developing adequate defenses. 6 decades. That meant people currently alive would face the full force of Tyranid invasion during their lifetimes. If the Eldar's prophecies were accurate, humanity had far less time to prepare for galactic extinction than anyone realized. Why share this information? Kesh asked. If humans are destroyed by Tyranids, that eliminates competition for galactic resources. Because Tyranid victory in this galaxy ensures their evolution beyond current limitations, Iana replied. Success here provides biomass and genetic templates sufficient for crossing intergalactic voids. They would spread beyond any possibility of containment, eventually consuming all biological life in the universe. Universal extinction. The scope of the threat dwarfed anything I'd previously considered. In my original universe, the worst-case scenarios involved planetary destruction or species extinction. Here, failure to properly manage galactic threats could doom biological life throughout existence. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Iana activated her crystal devices, projecting holographic displays that showed research modifications in stunning detail. Collaboration between Imperial science and Eldari technology. Your immunity research continues but incorporates safeguards that prevent uncontrolled development. Our psychic expertise helps identify optimal application parameters while maintaining strategic balance. The projected modifications were elegant solutions that addressed both species' concerns. Humans would gain immunity to current corruption threats, while Eldar maintained ability to guide development directions. Both species would benefit from shared knowledge while remaining capable of independent action. The Inquisition will never approve alien collaboration, Kesh said, though his tone suggested he was considering possibilities rather than rejecting them outright. Individual Inquisitors have cooperated with Eldari forces when circumstances required, Iana replied. Precedent exists for strategic partnerships under existential threat conditions. Your research could be conducted under joint oversight without violating core Imperial doctrines. Joint oversight. Shared research. Cooperation between species that had been enemies for millennia. In any other context, such proposals would be immediately classified as heretical xenophilia. But facing threats that promised universal extinction, maybe survival took precedence over ideological purity. What guarantees do we have? I asked. How do we know Eldar cooperation isn't just sophisticated manipulation to ensure human weakness? Iana gestured. An additional holographic displays showed timeline projections extending centuries into the future. Because our survival depends on your success. Eldari cannot defeat the Citan alone. We cannot contain Tyranid expansion independently. We cannot navigate chaos corruption without allies who possess immunity. Your strength becomes our strength, or we all perish together. The mathematics of mutual dependence. Both species needed each other to survive threats that neither could face alone. Cooperation wasn't idealistic compromise. It was practical necessity for avoiding extinction. How much time do we have to decide? Kesh asked. The web of fate shows decision points crystallizing within the next few hours, Iana replied. Beyond that threshold, choices become increasingly constrained by causal momentum. Action taken now influences possibilities for decades. Delay ensures fewer options remain available. A few hours to decide the future of human-Eldar relations, with universal extinction as the consequence of choosing poorly. The pressure was enough to paralyze decision-making entirely, but in a universe where hesitation was often fatal, maybe rapid choices were better than perfect ones. I need to consult with my superiors, Kesh said finally. Impossible, Iana replied. Vox communications have been severed, and Imperial reinforcements are 3 days away. The decision must be made by those present, with authority derived from circumstances rather than hierarchy. Circumstances rather than hierarchy. In the rigid command structure of the Imperium, such flexibility was revolutionary thinking. But emergency conditions often required adaptation that peacetime doctrine couldn't accommodate. Doctor, I said, what's your professional assessment of the proposed modifications? Kesh studied the holographic displays, his expertise allowing him to evaluate technical details that were beyond my understanding. Scientifically sound, he admitted reluctantly. The safeguards would prevent runaway development while preserving essential immunity characteristics. Implementation would require resources beyond current Imperial capabilities, but Eldari technology appears to bridge those gaps. And the strategic implications? Unknown but potentially beneficial, he said. If Farseer Iana's timeline projections are accurate, collaboration might indeed represent humanity's best chance for long-term survival. I looked at the Eldar Farseer, whose ancient eyes held knowledge of futures that spanned millennia. Then at Dr. Kesh, whose dedication to human survival had driven him to conduct research that pushed ethical boundaries in service of species protection. Both of them were asking me to help decide whether 40,000 years of mutual hostility could be set aside for cooperation against greater threats. What role would I play in this collaboration? I asked. Bridge between species, Iana replied immediately. Your unique temporal origin and immunity properties make you valuable to both Imperial science and Eldari future sight. You become living proof that cooperation produces benefits neither species could achieve independently. Living proof. Symbol of possibility. Representative of survival over extinction. The role would make me a target for extremists from both species, but it might also help create foundations for long-term peace. I need guarantees, I said. Protection for the innocent, limits on acceptable casualties, and veto power over research directions that violate basic ethical principles. Both Kesh and Iana stared at me as if I'd suggested something revolutionary, which, in a universe where ethics were usually subordinated to survival necessity, I probably had. Acceptable, Iana said after a pause. Eldari prophecy suggests ethical considerations become strategically valuable in approaching conflicts. Your moral perspective might provide insights neither species would develop independently. Doctor, I asked. Kesh looked at his research data, then at the Eldar technology that could make his work successful beyond anything Imperial science could achieve alone. Acceptable, he said quietly. If it ensures human survival, the first treaty between human and Eldar in 40,000 years was negotiated in a bombed-out research laboratory by 3 individuals with no official authority to speak for their species. But sometimes, history was made by people who were simply in the right place at the right time, with the courage to choose hope over fear. Even in the grim darkness of the far future, apparently there was still room for unexpected alliances. Chapter 7. The Price of Tomorrow, the joint research facility established in the ruins of Investigation Facility. Tertius became something unprecedented in Imperial history, a place where humans and Eldar worked together toward common goals, rather than planning each other's destruction. 3 months after the initial agreement, the collaboration had produced results that exceeded everyone's most optimistic projections. My role as bridge between the species proved more complex than simple. Translation between human and Eldar technical concepts. Both sides brought 40 millennia of accumulated hatred and mistrust to every interaction, requiring constant mediation to prevent cooperation from dissolving into violence. Some days, preventing war seemed more difficult than developing immunity to corruption. Dr. Kesh had adapted to working with Eldar researchers better than most Imperial personnel, his scientific curiosity overcoming doctrinal conditioning when presented with technology that made his previous work look primitive. The Eldar, for their part, demonstrated patience with human limitations that suggested genuine commitment to making the partnership succeed. Specimen 774 Gamma, Kesh announced during our morning briefing. The modified immunity protocols are ready for preliminary testing. The testing would be conducted on volunteers from the facility's security staff, individuals who understood the risks and had volunteered for potential mortality in service of species survival. Eldar safeguards built into the process ensured that successful subjects would gain targeted immunity rather than complete corruption resistance, maintaining the careful balance that prevented timeline catastrophe. Survival projections, I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. 67%, replied Ayana, who had remained at the facility as senior Eldar representative. Significantly improved from initial human estimates, but still carrying substantial mortality risk. 67%. That meant 1 in 3 volunteers would die to test whether humanity could gain limited protection against corruption. The mathematics were better than original Imperial research, but they still required accepting casualties that would have been unthinkable in my original universe. Alternative approaches? I pressed. None that provide results within acceptable time parameters, Kesh said. Tyranid advanced scouts have been detected in neighboring sectors. We have perhaps 5 years before major hive fleets arrive in this region. 5 years to develop, test, and deploy immunity treatments for populations numbering in the billions. The timeline constraints made rapid testing inevitable, even if the human cost was measured in millions of lives. In a universe where entire worlds were routinely sacrificed to buy time, such casualties were actually considered conservative. The first test subject was a volunteer named Sergeant Helena Voss, a 30-year Imperial Guard veteran who had fought everything from orc invasions to demon incursions. She approached the modified treatment chamber with calm professionalism, understanding better than most what survival in the 41st millennium required. "Ready when you are, sir," she told Kesh while settling into the treatment apparatus. The equipment combined Imperial medical technology with Eldar psychic enhancement systems, creating a hybrid platform that drew on both species' strengths. Beginning immunity induction protocol, Kesh announced, activating systems that would fundamentally alter Voss's genetic structure at the cellular level. Eldar safeguards monitored the process, preventing runaway changes that might compromise the strategic balance between immunity and controllability. The treatment lasted 6 hours, during which Voss's vital signs fluctuated through patterns that would have triggered emergency intervention under normal circumstances. But this wasn't normal circumstances. This was experimental medicine at the cutting edge of what both species understood about genetic modification. Neural activity stabilizing, reported Ayana, her psychic senses providing information that technological monitoring couldn't access. Consciousness integrity maintained throughout transformation, success probability increasing. When the treatment concluded, Sergeant Voss was still recognizably human, but fundamentally changed at levels invisible to casual observation. Genetic scans revealed immunity markers that would protect her against Genestealer infection, chaos corruption, and most other xenological threats, while leaving her vulnerable to Eldar intervention if circumstances required. "How do you feel?" I asked while medical teams ran comprehensive assessments. "Different," Voss replied after considering the question. "Stronger in some ways, but also limited. Like there are doors in my mind that didn't exist before, but I can't open them." The limitations were intentional safeguards that prevented immunity from developing beyond acceptable parameters. Voss had gained protection against current threats while remaining susceptible to advanced techniques that neither species wanted to deploy except under extreme circumstances. Preliminary testing indicates complete success, Kesh announced. Subject displays immunity to standard corruption vectors while maintaining baseline human psychology and physiology. No adverse reactions detected. Success. The first human in galactic history to possess designed immunity to alien corruption. Achieved through cooperation between species that had been enemies since before Terra developed spaceflight. It was a triumph that represented hope for both civilization's survival, but triumphs in Warhammer 40K came with prices that were often revealed only after payment was due. Long-range psychic detection indicates Imperial fleet movement toward this sector. Iana reported during our celebration of successful testing. Inquisition vessels accompanied by Space Marine elements. Estimated arrival 72 hours. Imperial fleet. Inquisition investigation. Space Marines sent to enforce compliance. The collaboration that had produced unprecedented scientific breakthrough was about to face judgment from authorities who had no context for understanding why cooperation with aliens might be necessary. Can we relocate the research? I asked. Impossible, Kesh replied. The equipment requires specific environmental conditions that exist only in facilities designed for this purpose. Moving the laboratory would delay progress by months or years. And we don't have months, Ayana added. Tyrannid scout organisms have been detected in outer system regions. Major contact is now inevitable within 18 standard months. 18 months. Less time than originally projected, meaning the research had to succeed quickly or not at all. The approaching Imperial fleet represented an existential threat to humanity's best chance for survival against galactic extinction. What are our options? I asked. Kesh consulted tactical displays that showed Imperial fleet positions relative to our facility. Negotiate with the approaching forces, explain the situation, and hope they recognize the strategic necessity of our work. Probability of successful negotiation? Yana asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. Minimal, Kesh admitted. Cooperation with Xenos is classified as treason, regardless of circumstances. The Inquisition will likely order immediate termination of all personnel, followed by facility sterilization. Immediate termination. Summary execution for everyone involved in the research, followed by destruction of the only hope for protecting humanity against corruption. The Imperium's ideological rigidity would destroy its own survival prospects, rather than compromise with alien assistance. Alternative options? I pressed. Ayana activated holographic displays that showed Eldar fleet positions throughout the sector. We could request Craftworld protection. Aladoni vessels could defend this facility against Imperial attack while research continues. Craftworld protection. Eldar warships fighting Imperial forces to preserve human-alien cooperation. The irony was staggering, but it might be the only way to prevent the research from being destroyed by humanity's own defenders. That would mean open war between human and Eldar forces, I pointed out. Limited war, Iana corrected. Tactical engagement to preserve strategic cooperation. Both species recognize that short-term conflict might be necessary to prevent long-term extinction. Limited war to preserve peace. Combat to protect cooperation. The paradoxes were making my head hurt, but they represented thinking adapted to a universe where survival often required choosing between bad options and worse ones. There's a third alternative, I said slowly, as an idea began forming. What if we gave the Inquisition something they wanted more than our deaths? Both Kesh and Ayana focused on me with sharp attention. Explain, Kesh said. The modified immunity treatment works, I continued. Sergeant Voss is living proof that the technology succeeds. What if we offered to transfer the complete research data to Imperial control, along with Eldar technical assistance for implementation? Impossible, Iana said immediately. Unrestricted access to immunity technology would enable uncontrolled human expansion. The strategic balance would be irreparably compromised. Not unrestricted access, I clarified. Controlled access, implementation under joint oversight, with Eldar participation, ensuring that safeguards remain in place. The Inquisition gets the technology they need to protect humanity, while Eldar maintain ability to guide development directions. Both of them stared at me as if I'd proposed something either brilliant or insane. Joint oversight, Kesh repeated slowly. Formal cooperation between Imperial and Eldar authorities. That would require treaty negotiations at the highest levels of both governments. And, I asked, and such treaties haven't existed for 40,000 years, Iana said. The political implications would reshape galactic civilization. Reshape galactic civilization. The phrase carried weight that made individual survival seem trivial by comparison. If human-Eldar cooperation became official policy rather than desperate expediency, it would fundamentally alter the universe's power structure. But it might work, I said. Both species need each other to survive approaching threats. Formal alliance makes more sense than pretending independence while secretly collaborating. The precedent value alone, Kesh muttered, apparently calculating implications faster than I could follow them. Assuming Imperial authorities could be convinced, Iana added. Inquisition doctrine classifies all Xenos as threats to human survival. Overturning 40 millennia of policy would require evidence they couldn't ignore. Evidence they couldn't ignore. Proof that cooperation was necessary for survival rather than idealistic compromise. Looking around the facility where human and Eldar had worked together to achieve what neither could accomplish alone, I realized the evidence already existed. "Sergeant Voss," I said, "she's evidence that cooperation works. Living proof that human-Eldar collaboration produces results that pure Imperial science couldn't achieve." One subject, Kesh pointed out, statistically insignificant for policy-making purposes. "Then we need more subjects," I replied. "As many as we can process before the fleet arrives. Create a group of immunity-enhanced personnel who can testify about the treatment's effectiveness." Iana consulted her crystal devices, apparently checking timeline projections. "Possible," she said finally. "Accelerated testing protocols could process perhaps 30 subjects before Imperial arrival. Sufficient sample size to demonstrate consistent results. 30 volunteers willing to risk their lives for a 67% chance of gaining immunity to corruption." In the Imperial Guard, those odds were actually considered favorable for survival operations. Finding volunteers wouldn't be the problem. Explaining to them why they were volunteering might be more difficult. "Do it," I said. "Process as many subjects as possible. When the Inquisition arrives, we'll have a demonstration of results that they can't dismiss as theoretical speculation." Both Kesh and Iana began implementing accelerated testing protocols. Their earlier cooperation now focused on creating evidence that might prevent the collaboration from being destroyed by those it was designed to protect. In 72 hours, we'd discover whether the Imperium could adapt to changing circumstances, or whether ideological purity was more important than species survival. Given the universe's track record, I wasn't optimistic. But in the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes hope was the only weapon available against inevitable extinction. Chapter 8. Dawn of Understanding. Inquisitor, Lord Thaddeus. Vex arrived at our facility with a fleet that could have sterilized continents, but chose to land with only a small personal guard. That decision suggested either supreme confidence in his ability to handle any threat, or recognition that the situation required investigation rather than immediate violence. Given the Inquisition's reputation, probably both. Vex was ancient even by inquisitorial standards, his augmetic replacements suggesting centuries of service in the Imperium's most dangerous assignments. When he spoke, his voice carried authority earned through dealing with threats that ranged from demon princes to rogue AI. This was not someone who could be easily impressed or intimidated. "Dr. Kesh," he announced upon entering the research facility, "you stand accused of xenological collaboration, treason against the Imperium, and heretical deviation from approved research protocols. Present your defense before I authorize summary execution." Summary execution. The words that had haunted my entire time in this universe now applied to people whose only crime was trying to save humanity from extinction. But Vex had offered a chance to present defense, which was more opportunity than most heretics received. "Inquisitor Lord," Kesh replied with formal precision, "we have achieved successful immunity development against all known corruption vectors. 31 test subjects have undergone treatment with 97% survival rate and complete immunity confirmation. 97% survival. The accelerated protocols had improved dramatically as human and Eldar researchers refined their techniques. What had started as desperate experimentation had evolved into reliable medical procedure with success rates that exceeded most Imperial military operations. Through cooperation with Xenos, Vex pointed out, collaboration with Eldar operatives in direct violation of fundamental Imperial doctrine. Through necessity, I interjected, stepping forward before Kesh could respond. "Inquisitor Lord, the threats facing humanity require solutions that exceed any single species' capabilities." Vex's attention focused on me with laser intensity. "Specimen 774 Gamma, the temporal displacement anomaly that initiated this investigation. Your continued existence suggests Dr. Kesh has abandoned proper research protocols entirely." "My continued existence has produced immunity to corruption that could save billions of lives," I replied, "including Imperial citizens who deserve protection from threats they can't fight alone." "Demonstrate this immunity," Vex commanded. What followed was the most surreal medical examination of my life. Imperial tech priests brought corruption samples that should have transformed me into something horrible within minutes. Genestealer genetic material, chaos-tainted organic matter, even fragments of what appeared to be tyrannid bioweapons. Each sample was applied to tissue cultures taken from my modified cellular structure. Nothing happened. The corruption vectors that could transform entire populations into alien servants had no effect on cells modified through human-Eldar cooperation. The immunity was complete, permanent, and replicable in other subjects using the same techniques. Fascinating, Vex murmured, studying the test results. Complete resistance to all tested vectors, but achieved through methodology that violates core Imperial principles. Achieved through methodology that works, Farseer Iana said, materializing from whatever Eldar stealth technology had concealed her presence during the initial confrontation. Inquisitor Lord Vex, your reputation for pragmatic assessment of existential threats precedes you. Vex didn't seem surprised by her appearance, suggesting either superior awareness or prior knowledge of the Eldar presence. Farseer Iana Arianal of Craftworld Alatok, your species' manipulation of Imperial forces is well documented, as is your species' tendency towards self-destructive ideological rigidity, Iana replied. We propose abandoning both tendencies in favor of mutual survival. Mutual survival. The phrase that had defined our entire collaboration, now presented to someone with authority to make decisions that affected billions of lives. Vex studied the holographic displays showing our research results while calculating implications that extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns. The Tyrannid approach timeline, he said finally. Our astropathic communications indicate major hive fleet movement toward this sector. Contact is inevitable within solar years rather than decades. Solar years. Even less time than our worst-case projections had suggested. The Great Devourer was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated, making the immunity research not just valuable, but absolutely critical for survival. Without immunity to bioweapon corruption, Iana added, human populations will be converted into tyrannid biomass before effective resistance can be organized. Your current military doctrine assumes enemies who seek conquest rather than consumption. Tyrannid bioweapons didn't just kill, they transformed victims into resources that strengthened the enemy. Traditional Imperial tactics of trading casualties for time would actually accelerate defeat by providing the hive fleets with additional biomass for continued expansion. The immunity treatment, Vex said, his attention shifting to Sergeant Voss and the other successful test subjects. Explain the psychological effects. Negligible, Voss replied immediately. Enhanced physical capabilities, improved disease resistance, maintained loyalty to the Emperor. The treatment strengthens Imperial citizens rather than compromising them. But with alien oversight, Vex pointed out, Eldar participation in the process creates dependency on Xenos cooperation. Temporary dependency, I said. The research data includes complete technical specifications. Imperial scientists could eventually replicate the process independently, but that would require decades of additional development time. Decades they didn't have, with Tyrannid scout organisms already probing outer system defenses. The choice was cooperation with aliens or extinction through ideological purity. Even the Inquisition recognized when survival trumped doctrine. Proposal, Vex announced after long consideration. Limited trial implementation under joint Imperial Eldar oversight. One sector, 1 billion test subjects, complete monitoring of results and side effects. 1 billion test subjects. The scale was staggering, but so were the potential benefits. If the immunity treatment worked at that level, it could be expanded to protect entire segmentums against corruption-based threats. Acceptable, Iana said after consulting her crystal devices. Craftworld Alatok will provide technical assistance and monitoring for the trial period. Success metrics can be established through mutual agreement. And if the trial succeeds, I asked. Then we adapt Imperial doctrine to accommodate new realities, Vex replied. 40,000 years of policy may require revision if circumstances demand cooperation over conflict. Revision of Imperial doctrine, adaptation of policies that had defined human civilization since the dark age of technology. The implications were revolutionary, but revolution might be necessary when the alternative was extinction. Implementation timeline? Kesh asked. Immediate, Vex said. Tyrannid contact probability increases with every passing day. We begin immunity treatments as soon as production facilities can be established. Production facilities. Industrial-scale immunity development, combining Imperial manufacturing capacity with Eldar technological sophistication. Within months, the collaboration that had begun in a bombed-out research laboratory would become policy affecting billions of lives. The precedent concerns, I said, thinking about long-term implications. If human-Eldar cooperation becomes official policy, other Xenos species will request similar arrangements. Then we evaluate each request based on strategic necessity, Vex replied. Cooperation with species that offer mutual benefit while maintaining hostility toward those that represent existential threats. Practical xenopolitics rather than categorical xenocide. Practical xenopolitics. The Inquisition was proposing to judge alien species based on their actions rather than their mere existence. In a universe where ideology often trumped efficiency, such pragmatism represented fundamental shift in thinking. What about internal resistance? Iana asked. Imperial factions that oppose cooperation regardless of strategic benefits will be educated about changing circumstances, Vex said, with tone that suggested education might involve considerable unpleasantness for those receiving it. The Inquisition exists to protect humanity from all threats, including those who would doom the species through inflexible adherence to outdated policies. But even as Vex spoke those words, I could see the calculations running behind his augmetic eyes. The political ramifications of what we were proposing would ripple through every level of Imperial hierarchy. Cardinals would denounce it as heresy, Lord Commanders would question the military implications, and countless bureaucrats would resist changes that threatened their established power structures. The ecclesiarchy will mobilize against this, I pointed out. 40,000 years of preaching xenophobic doctrine cannot be overturned by inquisitorial decree alone. The ecclesiarchy serves the Emperor's will, Vex replied coldly. When survival is at stake, theological concerns become secondary to practical necessity. Those who cannot adapt their interpretation of Imperial faith to accommodate changing circumstances may find their positions reconsidered. Another euphemism for the violent politics that governed human civilization in the 41st millennium. But Vex was right. Even the most fanatical cardinal would struggle to argue that allowing humanity's extinction served the Emperor's glory. What about the Adeptus Mechanicus? Dr. Kesh asked. Their cooperation will be essential for large-scale treatment production, but their doctrine regarding alien technology is even more rigid than ecclesiarchy theology. The Mechanicus follows the Omnissiah's guidance in all technological matters, Vex said. When presented with demonstrable proof that cooperation produces superior results, their pursuit of knowledge will overcome their prejudice against Xenos methodology. I wasn't entirely convinced. The tech priests I had encountered during my time in this universe displayed levels of dogmatic thinking that made religious fanatics seem flexible by comparison. But perhaps the promise of new technology would override their programmed hatred of alien innovation. There is another consideration, Farseer Iana interjected. The Chaos Powers will not remain passive observers of human-Eldar cooperation. They have invested considerable effort in maintaining hatred between our species. Chaos, the cosmic entities that fed on conflict, despair, and entropy, would view any successful collaboration between humanity and the Eldar as a direct threat to their agenda. If this alliance proved effective against tyrannid corruption, it might also demonstrate resistance to other forms of malevolent influence. Chaos intervention is inevitable, Vex acknowledged. But we are better positioned to resist such influence through cooperation than through isolation. Divided, both species remain vulnerable to manipulation and defeat. The truth of that statement was written in the blood-soaked history of the galaxy. 40,000 years of warfare had weakened both human and Eldar civilizations to the point where survival required adaptation of fundamental strategies. Pride and prejudice were luxuries that extinction-threatened species could no longer afford. Timeline for political implementation, I asked, knowing that military success would mean nothing without administrative support. 6 months for initial sector-wide policy changes, Vex replied. 1 year for broader segmentum integration. 5 years for Imperium-wide doctrinal revision, assuming consistent positive results and minimal internal resistance. 5 years to restructure 40 millennia of policy. The timeline was optimistic to the point of fantasy, but perhaps necessity would accelerate changes that would normally require centuries of gradual evolution. And if we encounter significant resistance? Iana asked. Then we provide practical demonstrations of cooperation's benefits, Vex said. Nothing convinces skeptics more effectively than superior battlefield performance. The months that followed, implementation were a blur of activity that transformed both Imperial and Eldar societies in ways neither had anticipated. Immunity treatment centers appeared on worlds throughout the sector, staffed by joint human-alien teams who worked together with increasing efficiency as mutual trust replaced ancient hatred. But the transition was not without complications. On Mordian 7th, an ecclesiarchy cardinal attempted to shut down treatment facilities through religious decree, claiming that alien-enhanced immunity violated the Emperor's divine plan for human purity. The cardinal's sudden disappearance during an Inquisition consultation sent a clear message to other potential dissidents. On Forge World Metallica, tech priests initially refused to cooperate with Eldar technicians, citing machine spirit contamination concerns. However, when Eldar modifications improved manufacturing efficiency by 40%, while reducing defect rates to negligible levels, theological objections quickly gave way to pursuit of technological perfection. The most surprising resistance came from certain Eldar, factions who viewed cooperation with Mon-Ki as degrading to their species' superior evolution. These voices were silenced when Craftworld's seers demonstrated that the cooperation was essential for preventing outcomes where both species faced extinction. The results exceeded even optimistic projections. Populations that received immunity treatment showed dramatic improvements in health, productivity, and resistance to all forms of corruption. More importantly, psychological testing revealed maintained loyalty to the Emperor alongside reduced xenophobic conditioning. People became more tolerant without losing their core identity. Joint training exercises between Imperial Guard, regiments and Eldar Rangers produced tactical innovations that neither force could have developed independently. Human resilience combined with Eldar precision created military units capable of engaging threats that would have overwhelmed either species alone. Industrial cooperation yielded even more dramatic results. Eldar psychotechnology enhanced Imperial manufacturing processes, while human mass production capabilities allowed Eldar innovations to be deployed at unprecedented scale. Weapons, vehicles, and equipment emerged from these collaborative efforts that surpassed anything either civilization had produced independently. When the first Tyrannid scouts finally made contact with Imperial forces, the difference was immediately apparent. Bioweapon attacks that should have corrupted entire regiments had no effect on immunity-enhanced troops. The Hive fleet's primary advantage, converting enemies into resources, was neutralized by cooperation between species that had chosen survival over ancient hatred. Status report. I requested during the first major engagement between Imperial forces and Tyrannid advance elements. Complete tactical success, reported Colonel Harrison, former Imperial Guard officer, now commanding joint human-Eldar units. Enemy biocorruption entirely ineffective against enhanced personnel. Casualty rates 60% below projected levels, 60% below projections. That meant hundreds of thousands of lives saved in a single engagement, with the promise of millions more preserved as immunity treatment expanded throughout the sector. But the victory came with sobering intelligence about the scale of the approaching threat. Tyrannid scout organisms had been testing Imperial defenses for months, gathering data about human tactical responses and technological capabilities. The main Hive fleet approaching the sector was larger than any previously encountered, with bioship formations that stretched across multiple star systems.